and really excited to see so many faces here on Saturday morning for our third workshop on sustainable landscaping. If you missed the other two, we started with designing your space, and then the second one was about how do you actually get to the installation phase, and today we're going to talk about maintenance. We have some really great speakers lined up for you today, but I just wanted to say welcome and thanks for coming. Landscaping is such an important topic for sustainability because it touches on so many aspects of sustainability, as many of you know. So how it's going to work today, we'll have a series of presenters, and then we're going to go do a garden tour so we can see Betsy's kindly offered her house to show us her landscaping there. And for folks who haven't been here before, the restrooms are just down in the hall. If you take a left side of the door, feel free to get more food and coffee whenever you want throughout the morning. And I'll hand it over to Miles to take it from here.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank everybody for being here today. It's a lovely day to just be out in your garden, right?
It just rained. We can wait.
You're right. I was driving up and going over the Sudbury River, and there were like 5 local residents that were out with their cameras photographing fall foliage and birds and everything. So it just reminded me on the way up of how like the community of Concord is so conservation and community oriented. So I just wanted to point that out, that you live in a very interesting and conscious-minded place for conservation. So my name is Miles, and I've met many of you at the last workshop. I am the director of Parterre Ecological, and we do invasive plant management and native restoration projects. This is one of our sites here. Now, this is a site that's maintained sustainably. I might get out of the way. Am I using the keyboard to? Okay. This is a site that is maintained sustainably. It looks fairly wild, right? But it's a very urban area. It's actually constructed. It's a 3.5 acre constructed wetland in the middle of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it's a 3.5 acre constructed wetland. It's deal with stormwater management. It's right at the end of Cambridge Park Drive, next to Hill Life Station. There's a bike path that runs through it. There's boardwalks through it. And we're there maintaining it on a regular basis. This landscape was created by primarily live stakes and seeding. So we have, I just want to be able to point that out for these wild places that over the course of a short period of time can look like they're fairly wild and established based upon very low input into the natural environment. So, and then I wanted to consider like where you all are, right? And this is a plant community, and as a community of Concord, there's a majority of Concord is you've got 3 rivers that come in this community, and you have a majority of red maple wetlands, which is what this image is provoking here. And within that red maple wetland, there's a certain plant community, right? You can think about this plant community as something that's very different from something you might find that's more upland, like a red oak plant community where you have like blue stem grasses with low bush blueberry and other terraces, right? If you're high and dry in those specific locations. With the red maple wetland, you're obviously a lot more lower. You have this diffusion, and a lot of them are floodplains within the community. In thinking about these actual plant communities, what would you find in this particular one? Obviously, a massed canopy of predominantly red maples, right? You'd have some ash in there, you'd have elm in there, but predominantly it's red maples. And they stand as like elders, like into the late fall and early winter, you could find those gray trunks, right, that are just standing standing tall, and what's beneath them. A lot of the ornamental plants that we use in our garden, that we'd like to see in our garden, things like high bush blueberry, right? Winterberry, pepper bush, right? Clethra, sweet pepper bush, as well as lindera, the spice bush. And then there's a lot of other herbaceous plants as well, like our ostrich fern, right? Which is our main fiddlehead, right? Another opportunity, blue flag iris as well. So this is a plant community it's one of the main plant communities of Concord, based upon where you all live as a community. So I just wanted to use that as an example to say that you should, when you step out your door and you're thinking about these sustainable practices, think about where you are and what that plant community is. Is it low and wet, or is it high and dry? So, and the other thing to consider, obviously, with that is the water regime, right? So we're always thinking about ways that we can protect and restore any natural water system on site. We're looking to irrigate intelligently, deeply, and sparingly. We're going to be talking a little bit more very shortly about some of the issues with over-irrigating our properties in Concord and elsewhere around the country. Reduce and treat stormwater runoff volume, the flow rate, and temperature of water. We run into this a great deal with clients. It's like there's water issues on site, and what do I do with them? And I'm going to show you a couple slides of just an idea of what you could do with it on site. Some of these solutions create better wildlife habitat value, right? And also diversity of plant material on site by creating these rain gardens is what we're going to look at. While also enhancing the beauty of your property as well, right? And creating more diverse habitat types on site. So one way to do that is to look into a rain garden, right? And just a couple of really brief slides. This could be a whole other presentation. But I just wanted to let people know that if you do have an opportunity, a low spot on your property to create a rain garden, they're made to capture and infiltrate stormwater that will carry pollutants and filter pollutants before they get into the rivers and the streams. But there's also an opportunity there, again, to create these different habitat type right on your property that you may not otherwise be able to do. So you're moving stormwater from either a downspout or across your property, across lawn or patio space or driveway space, and into a low-lying area. One of the things that I would point out is to consider moving that water at least 10 feet away from any structure, right? Away from the house, so you don't want a rain garden right up against your house for obvious structural issues associated with water being too close to the house. And you want to make sure that those soils are prepared properly, that they will infiltrate water, and that you have a subgrade underneath that will move that water through back down into groundwater and away from the house. So those are I think the top two things, like moving it away from the house and also infiltrating it into the groundwater. We have not spent a lot of time looking at, in this graphic you have a beehive at the top where water is raises to a certain point and spills over into a lower perforated pipe to outlet if needed. We like to consider more of infiltrating directly into the groundwater itself. And then in terms of the size of those as well, this is a really quick calculation on rain gardens, right? You're calculating the total impervious area, right? So it's a walkway or a driveway that you're calculating, length times width. You're multiplying that area by the average rainfall. Let's assume an inch, or should we assume an inch and a half or two with some of the storm events that we've been having recently, right? And then you're just simply dividing that by the depth of the rain garden. So if we, in this particular model, you have 450 square feet within that drainage area on the lower left. You're multiplying that times the 1, or if we multiply it by 2, we have 900 square feet. And then you're dividing it by the depth So you end up with a 75 square foot rain garden. So this is another question that clients consistently ask me is like, how do I figure out like what size rain garden I need to put in? So I just thought I'd give you all a quick calculation for that. And then as we move on from that water regime, we want to think about other practices in our landscape. And one of the main ones is obviously our lawn, right? And how we treat our lawn. We all like our open space. We like having, the kids play on it. We like to be able to go out and have that open space. But over time, it's become a main issue in terms of like the amount of herbicides and pesticides and other treatments that we use in our lawns. It's actually, many statistics will show that it's above and beyond what our agriculture does in this country. That it's a huge piece of what we are utilizing to put inputs back into the natural system. A lot of those inputs are running off into our stormwater, they're ending up in water bodies, and we've all, I'm sure, recognize and understand that. So ways in which that we can reduce, we just had something pop up on the screen, I should actually, it's from this computer, right?
Yeah. You want to just remove the disk? Correct.
Oh, there it is.
Did you
See that?
Whatever, did you just have it, you can pull it right out.
I think I put it on the desktop. Right, well, I think so. I'm sorry.
What's that? So one of the things that I wanted to point out in a few of these slides coming up is like, what can we do this time of year, right? We're in the fall. We've got all of these leaves that are coming down on our lawn, and what can we do in order to manage those leaves? One of the things that we've done for years on many of our properties is you start to mulch those lawn clippings and leaves, and also spread compost in the fall. I happened to be at Mount Auburn Cemetery yesterday, and I was talking to the curator of horticulture. They have a no leaf cleanup policy at Mount Auburn. They've been chipping leaves for like the past 20 years on site. He said that when they started doing the baseline 20 years ago, and they figured out that the organic content of the soil was at like 2 to 3%. And over the course of 10 years, they elevated that to 8 to 10% just by mulching leaves in the top surface of the soil. The other thing they're doing is they're not looking at growing grass necessarily, right? They're looking to grow, they're growing beautiful trees and shrubs at Mount Auburn Cemetery. And so they actually looked at the organic levels like 8 inches down into the soil surface, and that's where they found that high organic content. So it's interesting just as a difference between utilizing those chemical fertilization to really just thinking about regular inputs of like mulching your grass clippings back into your lawn and mulching your leaves back into your lawn, how you can elevate that organic content back in. The other thing, yeah.
Can you talk about how exactly to do that? Because one of
Sure.
the homeowners are always presented with so many leaves.
Yeah.
How do you actually do that, manage?
Yeah, sure, I can definitely get into that. The other thing I just wanted to point out too is just like lawn alternatives, right? There's a lot of beautiful native ground covers that can be implemented, and we'll talk just on a few slides a little bit about that. So here's what we're dealing with, right? We have all these leaves that are falling on our properties. Probably many of you are going to go home this afternoon and start to clean up. So I propose this. Let's consider like taking all those leaves and going over them with your lawnmower, preferably your electric lawnmower. We have more and more. We have contracts with when we're working with cities and municipalities where they in the contract they say that you have to use electric equipment on site, which is great. We're heading in a different paradigm, a different direction when it comes to that. More and more we use electric, there's electric hand blowers, which we try our best to minimize at all costs, and other string trimmers and so forth. So here's an example of what you can run over these leaves initially with your lawnmower that's been, maybe it was sharp in the spring, you've been mowing the grass all season long, it's starting to dull up anyway, right? So why not just run through it with, your mulching content? You're not blowing them out the side, you're mulching on, you've got the mulch setting on, everything's closed up on the mower, and you're mulching it and chipping it down. Just as it is, you can see how the leaves are falling here.
But you do when there's pine needles and pine cones and stickers.
Yeah, so that's a different, pine trees, I have a thing against pine trees. They're a wonderful native tree, great for, habitat, they just always seem to be quite a mess. So the pine needles, there's certainly a different plant combination for like underneath, a pine tree. Certainly some of those pine needles should get cleaned up, or they could just be left as a mulch. Certainly when you look at pine trees in a natural environment, there's not turf growing underneath it. There's a pine barren, and it's usually barren of a lot of other vegetation that's underneath it. So you could consider just, reducing what's there. There's also other, plants that will grow naturally underneath those conditions. Certainly some blueberries, sedges, there's sweet fern and other things that will grow in a condition that's more acidic. So
You use it to mulch blueberries.
yeah, absolutely.
And strawberries.
Yeah. Blueberries and strawberries makes a great mulch. Yeah. Well, yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going right older. We live in a pine forest, so we've had to deal with this issue for years.
Mm-hmm.
We have fewer leaves, but we actually leave them. We had started mulch mowing everything, including the pine needles, and have found that we don't necessarily need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't pay a lot of attention to our lawn either, we have small areas. But given that, I think it relates back to your slide on planting.
Yeah.
So because we live in pine forest.
Right.
We have azalea and rhododendron, and
Right.
we have dogwoods and
Exactly.
sweet fern and blueberries and all of the above. And so, if we're going to break anything, we actually break the needles around those trees because they're acid loving, so it provides the nutrients that they need.
Exactly, and also suppressing other weeds
Exactly.
as well, right? Exactly. So when in a situation like this, you're chipping them up initially. So a lot of that material is just being pushed down into that grass layer. And then honestly, at my own house, I'll go back over this after it's all chipped up, and I'll put the bag on the mower, and I'll pick some of that material up, and I'll move it into beds. And they're not necessarily the front beds, but they're secondary beds that I'm trying to mulch. And you have a combination then of like grass clippings as well as the leaf chips. And that is like compost just like waiting to happen, right? As it sits over the winter, it starts to decompose, makes a wonderful mulch that you're starting to suppress weeds and everything with into next spring. Many of you were on Elsinore a few weeks ago at Barbara's house. This is a good example of like a lawn that's a bit alternative in terms of the Zenomo seed that's starting to come in, with showing us putting some compost, raking compost into the lawn. It's a great way to add additional organic matter to the top of the lawn, and overseeding. Of course, we're in the tail end of the ideal time of year for overseeding lawns. So a no-mow example would be a great idea. Part of the reason why I was in Mount Armin Cemetery yesterday is they're trying to reduce the inside these old cast iron fences. They're looking to, it's always been a maintenance issue for them, they're looking to turn a lot of these turf areas into ground covers. So he was looking for alternatives to turf on the inside of these fences, because the guys are literally lugging mowers up over these old cast iron fences to mow. So suggestions in those areas were things like epimedium, like barrenwort, different carex varieties, and other ground covers that will eventually fill those areas in.
So one question, you just said, if you take up the excess with a lawnmower bag and you put it in a compost pile?
You can either put it in a compost pile, or if you have secondary areas that you'd like to build beds in, or you'd like to reduce weeds in, it certainly can be can be used as like a living mulch, as like a sheet mulch.
And after it composts for a while, then you take it up again and you rake it on, you spread it on the lawn, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you're putting it in an individual pile for composting, then absolutely you can leave it in a pile and let it break down and turn it and so forth. But I mean, there are secondary areas, like on many of our properties that we're working on, where it could just be like underneath shrubs in the back where you get, there's a lot of weeds and so forth, and you can literally just take the bag off the mower, shake it out and rake it out and let it sit. And over the period, I have a slide in here, a couple slides forward, where it actually shows just leaves chipped up and like spread out over a garden. And it makes a wonderful mulch. I mean, it's a lot of the leaf mulch that we use in our gardens all the time is nothing but like, fine chipped up leaves that have been recycled back into, we pay to haul it away, and then we pay to bring it back. So it's kind of like breaking up that cycle and trying to find ways of utilizing it, right at the house.
What percentage should you take up with the lawnmower bag? Most of it, and then put it in the compost?
Yeah, so you'll have leftover debris on the surface. You can see like a lot of it got chipped up. The finer particles get like chipped up and get layered down into the soil surface underneath and between the grass blades. But a lot of it will also stay on the top. So if you put your bag on, you run back over it, it will clean. It's already been chipped up once. It gets chipped up again. It's a finer particle, finer chipped up organic, and it makes like a really nice strong mulch material. That's gonna be you don't have like pine cones and too many sticks and so forth. Yeah.
I was a volunteer in the woods, and one of the things that impressed me early on was that they were chipping the leaves on the property and putting them down again on the garden.
Yeah.
They've changed that totally. Now they don't bother to chip,
They just leave the leaves. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, and I've tried that with some of my gardens, and I would say the majority of plants have no problem coming up.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of people.
Well, I do it on my garden lawn, but as I said, it encourages things. We have a lot of violets. They're acid loving, so you need pine needles there, and you get something that's works with the environment.
Exactly. So yes.
Sure. Last time you said that the Norway Maple, we should use that. So what do you? What would you say?
So that is actually
tree I have
that's a
being
very
used.
good. That's
So
a
what
really
should
good
I
idea.
do?
Sure. So there's Norway Maple, and also that create this allelopathic tendency, right? So they really like to push out anything else around them and just be the king of that area.
Don't use those leaves.
So a lot of those leaves we will either use and we will either compost and get off site, as well as sometimes we'll do the same thing with oak leaves because they have a tannin, they're heavy. But if the conditions are right, like I would say like at Barbara's house, where you have this, we're looking at the plant community and what grows underneath oak trees, and we've put that in, then that is perfectly okay to put back into the system. But something like Norway maples, you have these allelopathic tendencies of the plant that tend to push out other plants, and that includes the leaves. So you take those leaves and you put them in your garden, and there's not a lot of like scientific data associated with that, but it does. It is something that's like readily talked about if you have a concentration of Norway maples on your property.
So it's okay to compost those leaves, just don't like leave them on them.
Correct.
So
Correct.
give them to the town.
Give them to the town. Let them sell it,
Well, or
and then
like once
they go and get it
down.
as compost, and let it be diffused or into other leaves, right? So here's the other thing about this is taken in my backyard. This is clover. This is white clover in the lawn. Here's my real quick thing on clover. For years, I was fertilizing my lawn and keeping things like dandelions and clovers and stuff out, right? As soon as I stopped doing that, and part of it was having a little guy that was running around in bare feet, as soon as I stopped doing that and the clover started coming in, all of a sudden the rabbits stopped eating my echinacea. And all of a sudden the rabbits were not eating other garden plants. So if you have a live system that's in your lawn and you're allowing those to be there, that's where the rabbits are feeding instead of other plants. The other thing is obviously that they're deep rooted, they are nitrogen fixing, and they're also continue to be evergreen during times of drought. So clover in the lawn is a very beneficial plant. This is the back corner of my property. When we moved to the site, it had been mown for a number of years, and what I noticed as I was going over it is that there were all of these more mown kind of bunched grasses, right? And I found it very interesting, and I stopped mowing the area. And this is actually a year later, it's all a little loosened. So the other interesting thing is if you have a hot, dry area, consider this as a lawn alternative, like actually starting to plant a meadow. And what I've done is I started to plug in different plant species in this hot, dry area, like Asclepias tuberosa and other wildflower plants. Now this is not in my house, but this is a meadow that we have on one of our properties, where this is the other area. So you could have a grassland meadow, but this is a more intensive meadow that was created just by utilizing seed. We removed the turf, we seeded it in the fall, and this is actually 3 years later with minimal maintenance requirements. Initially, there's a plan, and there's a lot of information out there more and more on creating meadows. But essentially, it's like seeding, and then mowing a couple times a year at certain heights, and then allowing these other wildflower plants to come in.
Is fall the best time to seed?
Fall is a wonderful time to seed. If you think about the cycle of a wildflower, the seeds are all falling right now.
And is it too late now?
It's not. We actually do a lot of dormant seeding. So we wait until we're out there putting seed down around Thanksgiving. It's a wonderful time of year to remove grass because you have zero weed competition right now, right? So you can have bare soils and you don't have to worry about crabgrass or ragweeds and smartweeds and other things we would want to come in and colonize. You get that seed down, and it has a whole winter to scarification. It falls, it's embedding itself in freeze and thaw and rain and winter, and it will germinate in the spring. But you will have a flush of spring weeds, and you just want to go in and mow at 6 or 8 inches and just take their heads off. Not hand pulling to disturb it and create more weeds, but essentially go in and do more of just mowing over the top of the surface. So goldfinch, right? So consider leaving native wildflower seed heads this time of year. Consider collecting native seed this time of year. Consider dividing and transplanting. Great time of year for all of these. Wonderful time to see the structure of shrubs and the structure of trees and be able to take out some of those crossing branches, dead limbs, other things in the garden by doing fall and winter pruning. Again, we talked about sheet mulching to reduce weeds. The idea of using what you have collected on site in some of those secondary areas. And then plant additional native trees, shrubs, and perennials as well. Great time of year for planting. These are the echinacea against my shed right now. This is what they look like in the winter, right? It's a wonderful, it's great to leave some of these seed heads, both for the birds, but also just structure in through the garden through the winter months. Collection of seeds. This is Asclepias incarnata. This is our swamp milkweed. This is a bag of seed that I now have in my garage. Some of it will go into flat containers that I just grow because that's what I do. I like to but a lot of this could be seed that you could actually start on your own soil. There's pods, common milkweed pods all through meadows. You just have to go out, look around, find some of these. There's also great resources for seed collection. New England wetland plants is a great local. It's in the western part of the state. Ernst Seed, ERNST, also has great seed.
There's a seed library at the Fowler.
Perfect. There's a seed library right here.
At the Fowler Library across the street.
Oh, that's awesome. I had no idea. Perfect.
Natives. Are they natives?
I think so. I haven't looked into it deeply, but it's there. Check it out.
So this is another slide of some of our seed collection, right? So when we're out, we're obviously in these wild lands a lot. We tend to just grab seed, and one of my guys is really obsessed with seed and making different mixes. So that's an image that he wanted me to share with you that you can start to do. again, just speaking really briefly about dividing and transplanting, you can take a big plant and move it in and chop it up this time of year into several different smaller pieces and move it around your garden. It's a great time of year to be building bigger beds for next spring with more plant material, right? Making it up into small little pieces and moving it around. This is the picture I wanted to show you of the mulch in the bed. So these are leaf chips from the bag mower, right? Moving them from the lawn, chipping them up, running them over a couple times, and moving them directly into the bed. These are conservation grade plants. So you have like all these 1 gallon plants. These are also sold from New England wetland plants, as well as more and more nurseries are specializing in small, native, properly grown plant material. So I would recommend starting with a small native plant and just allowing it to kind of come in and start to fill and colonize the space. We typically plant these at around 5 feet on center, and this is just a closer up image of these 1 gallon pots and what they look like when they eventually when they start to come in. So thank you very much.
Okay, I will try to be quick to keep us on time. My talk is going to be a little bit based on the water use restrictions in town and why we have them, just because it's a ever-changing environment, and then we'll go into a little bit of mitigation in ways that people can save water and reuse water on their own properties. There is a big challenge of everybody's expected to do more with less, plan for the future, make it easy, make it not cost money. And there is this expectation that everybody's going to like it and they're going to have fun while doing it. This is the biggest challenge. Denver, San Francisco had some great water conservation campaigns back when they were going through their whole drought situation a few years ago. So if you ever Google, Denver water drought, you'll come up a lot of these good, funny ads. And I know I'm speaking to the choir, but more hot days. July 2019 was one of the hottest on record. I don't know if you guys have seen the Climate Ready Boston papers in 7 or 8 years old now. And while it was the hottest record July in history, we only had about 12 days above 90 in 2019. But it's going to, over time, continue to get worse. And we all know more rain, less often. There was something that I read about a month ago that was saying, as the average temperature increases, just more evaporation happens. The air, because it's warmer, can hold on to more water, and then it lets out more out of temperature. We've all seen this happen. Our biggest challenge is how to keep the rain local, how to make it so when we're in drought, we still have a good supply. I don't know how much you guys all know about the Concord water system, but we have 6 groundwater wells in town, mainly down the southern portion of town, and then 1 surface water supply in Littleton. Groundwater wells are really susceptible to drought. The water table drops, those groundwater supplies drop. The reservoir is actually a really good storage location. It allows us, when the groundwater level is high and it's going out to lakes, rivers, and streams, to use water from the groundwater wells. It allows us to build up storage, as much storage as we have in Magog Pond, so when those groundwater levels are dropping, we're able to supplement with that surface water supply.
Melissa,
Yes.
what is the dark blue versus light blue?
The dark blue is actually the surface area of the pond,
Okay.
and the light blue area around it is what we call the watershed, so all
Okay.
the water that falls in that area goes into the pond. And we have what they call a Water Management Act permit and registration. So the state actually tells us how much water we're allowed to take out of the ground or out of our water supplies and give to the residents on average throughout the year. So we start to get really challenged in the summertime when everybody's using the water in the mornings to irrigate. We use about a quarter of our daily water supply to put on our lawns between the months of about July, August, and September. So that's over 1 million gallons that we treat, that just goes right onto the lawns. And, if you look at the comparable lots, neighbors versus neighbors, you use about 150% more water if you're irrigating your lawn compared to your neighbor with a similar type of home. And if you look at the average across town, that's about $600 more a year on your water bill, just for irrigating the lawn. And again, I keep talking about lawns because that is where the bulk of the water goes for irrigation. It's not the beds, it's not your flowers, it's not your vegetable gardens. It is the big green fast lawns. So you can see, I talked about our permit and our registration. We have to keep the average waterman lower than 2.5 million gallons a day. So on average, we're about 2. In the winter, when we're not doing any irrigation, not using water outside, we're down at about 1.5. Average summer, we get up to that 2.5, and then on those really hot days, we start to spike.
I just have a general question.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about using gray water for irrigation? I mean, down the line, separating water systems in a way that we have the drinking, the human consumption.
That would be amazing.
It's
Yes.
huge. It's a huge thing, but I don't know where things are moving with that.
Right, I would say that it would be more on an individual property-wise basis. It would be very hard to develop a gray water infrastructure system, but there are many states that actually allow for gray water reuse. Collect your rainwater and put it into a cistern, pump it up to your roof, and use it to flush your toilets, do laundry, other things like that. And it's actually really great. I have a slide farther down about rainwater collection. It was really hard to find some visual examples of systems that weren't used for gray water reuse. Yes?
Can you talk a bit about the impact of having your own well that you use for the garden? Because my sense is the town still isn't like that, but I don't understand if you're spending a lot of money I spend a fortune on my well system.
Right.
It doesn't really make sense, but it just feels right. I want to use the town's water for that sort of thing, but I still sense that your department doesn't approve of wells.
Right, and there is kind of two schools of thought. In theory, if you are in any of the light blue areas, which are the watershed areas, if you're there and you put a well in, it's intercepting water between the use point and there. All of our wells that we have are pretty shallow wells, so they're in sand and gravel above the bedrock. In most private residential wells or bedrock wells, really, really deep. So is there a true connection between the two of them? It's kind of debatable. The other challenge that we have is that the state, which I'm going to get into now, really kind of dictates a lot of the water use restrictions and the frequency that we put them out. And because there's that debatable connection, the state is starting to say that they will have water use restrictions on the private wells.
Right.
So it's kind of which will be very, very hard to enforce. Right now we can kind of use meters to help us determine when people are watering. But, if we have to go into enforcement, right now we don't enforce on wells, but in the future, all signs are pointing towards that we're going to have to. So that's kind of the...
private well visited to see if it's going to be impacting or not?
Can you rephrase?
Just
say that again.
I don't believe my well's in a place that it's going to impact the town. Is there a way of finding out?
We could look into it, but as far as any type of regulation or enforcement, it's really hard just to go on a case-by-case basis, and that's just, unfortunately, that's one of the biggest challenges of my job is when it comes to land of enforcement and balancing. But there's two schools of thought there. Yes, they're directly connected. They come from the same aquifer. No, it's sand and gravel versus bedrock, and then it comes enforcement, and then it's also I don't want to enforce it until the state says that we have to, because there's all sorts of blue laws and everything that are kind of surrounded by the right to use water that's on your own property, or that passes by our property. So this is where we get kind of challenged a little bit. I just added on our ability to actually pump water. If you look up at the top, peak capacity is if everything is functioning beautifully and everything's working the exact way we want to. That 3.7 million gallons a day, to be able to pump that on an emergency basis, that's a little tough. Reliably, we can get to that 3.2 million gallons a day, but you see, when everybody's using their irrigation systems, we have trouble meeting that goal. We have 2 water storage tanks which are able to buffer that a little bit, but not for more than a couple days. If we start seeing those water storage tanks drop, that's when we have to say, hey guys, we need some help. Please stop using your water by doing some water use restrictions. And then the orange line is sustainable capacity. That is really when, a station goes down for one reason or another. Let's say, we didn't have water rights to Mitigation, or if we, our other largest well, Deaconess facility, it got struck by lightning, or, it needed, some type of maintenance that was unexpected. That's when we would really have to, implement maybe more water use restrictions and water bans, because we just don't have enough water to support ongoing irrigation. And
Do you happen to know how many customer, residents, property owners in town have the irrigation?
So right now we have just over 900 registered irrigation systems, people who have notified us. We have a town bylaw for people to notify us about irrigation systems. My belief is, we have about 5,500 customers, and I'm guessing there's probably about 2,500 irrigation systems out there. So we're getting people there.
Consider having an education program about why irrigation is not a good idea in terms of healthy lawn over the long term. And
Yes.
think about that, because people think it's the best thing for their lawn, but the alternative to allowing grasses to be deep-rooted and the biology of the soil and all of that, and not keeping your lawn on life support.
I like that.
If people were taught that, I think we would see a shift in not going in that direction.
Exactly. So, and I don't want to ostracize anybody. Everybody can close their eyes if they want. But does anyone here have an irrigation system?
I do, it's mainly on vegetable beds, so.
So I may be speaking to the choir a little bit, but I'm completely on board with that, because it is one of our biggest liabilities environmentally, economically, and just, being able to provide water for town.
People aren't given full information when they install these. They only hear, oh, it's only good.
And that's what some of the registration process is meant to do. There's a registration process where they have to let us know. They also have a connection fee based on their increased demand on the system. And that's meant to be a little bit of a stopgap of, hey, whoa, you have this $1,400 fee. Let's rethink this. Unfortunately, $1,400 for a lot of the people putting in these irrigation systems is just a small blip. But I would say maybe 1 out of 10 people, once they see that, once they start having the conversations and realize that there's this changing paradigm, rethink it.
Do you also track commercial use?
Yes.
Like around 9 Acre Corner intersection in particular?
Running
The water's there
Running in
every day.
Agricultural use or?
No.
No, the water in the tiny little median strip between the road and the parking
I'll see if I
area.
can maybe do some outreach. But our permits have these limits, and one of the limits is the average amount of water people use every day, on average throughout the town. This is the large houses, the small houses, the houses with 10 people. Gotcha. So if we're above that line, we have to implement more water use restrictions. If we're below that line, we don't have to implement as many. Unfortunately, we are right around it. We're better than most of our neighboring communities. So we have our lovely green, yellow, red program. Green, consider it a training program, because this is, May, you start off, we say 1 day or 1 inch per week. Now, it's all about your soils on the property, all about your stuff. This is not a one-size-fits-all program by any means. but realizing that when the state says we're in a drought, or when we literally don't have enough water to pump out of the ground, we are going to the water use restriction, the yellow, where we say we need your help. So the green is kind of your training program. And we don't want to go into a full-on watering ban unless we have to. Watering day for the people who have irrigation systems. It's essentially your municipal tax day pickup. And if you have any questions, if you're on the line there, you go to concord.gov/watering day, you are able to literally type in your address and figure out where you are. And so droughts for us in Concord are measured up where the Concord River meets the Merrimack River. We have a stream gauge there for everyone in the Concord or the Concord River watershed system. That's the stream gauge that we have to base our water use restrictions on, and this is what the levels that they say are acceptable at certain periods of time. You see the purple line in May through July. That is higher because of fish spawning rates. They want to make sure there's enough cold water in the rivers for fish to be able to spawn. And then in July through September, the natural level. If we fall below those triggers there, we have to implement water use restrictions, whether we have water available in our wells or not, when we get our new permit, which is going to be any day now. And the other thing to notice about this graph, and this kind of comes to talk to rain gardens, infiltrating the water into the ground, keeping it local, is you can see it rains, and there's a big jump, and then it slowly trickles down. If we're able to infiltrate the water into the ground instead of just having it run off into catch basins and directly into rivers, those peaks wouldn't be up, down, it would be more like this. All that water would be going down into the ground. The water would be slowly going out to the streams, filtering out pollutants, not having large temperature and oxygen swings. Slowly and slowly, just like Miles was talking about with the rain gardens. And the other thing now is to really know your home. This is where it really comes into the maintenance aspect. If you have a lawn, you want to know what the root depth is. I have this fancy tool that frequently stays in my car. This is a soil probe, and anybody who wants to borrow it can just let me know and they can take it home. You simply just twist it down into the ground as far as it can go. You can kind of feel when you hit a rock or when it changes from soil into sand, it gets a little crunchy. And you pull it out and you're able to see how deep your soil is, how deep your roots are going, and it's actually a great way to collect samples to send them out to either UMass or UNH for testing. It's a great way to understand if different areas of your lawn have different root depths. If your roots are really short, you can start to adjust your watering. If it's really sandy soil, you'll be able to see that the soil is not going to hold on to as much water. If it's real clay soil, you'll be able to say, okay, so my soil is going to stay wet a lot longer than someone, let's say up in Throw Hills that's just full of sand. So really, you can borrow this at any time. I'm kind of hoping to get one. Have you guys heard about the Library of Things?
Yes,
sure.
At the library. I kind of want to get a nicer one of these that actually it's more of a square.
What's it called?
This is a soil probe, or the Library of Things.
No, that.
Yeah.
It's called a soil.
Right, it's a soil probe, yeah. I just,
So what?
soil probe?
DRP.
Yes. And it's absolutely fantastic. Anytime I go out to a resident's house to talk to them about anything conservation, this I bring. And also, as part of town regulations, any of these new larger developments that we go to, they're required to have 6 inches of high quality soil put down, so they can't just skim coat the soil. And so I bring this out to any of my checkout inspections, and I have the contractors pushing it down into the ground. It's really funny when the contractors have compacted soil with only a couple inches, and you see them really struggling really hard as big burly men trying to get it down into the ground. And after you have that situation happen once or twice with the contractors, they know you're coming out to check it, so they have the right soil depth. You send it out, you get the right soil material. You can either send it out and just get the nutrients tested, or they can actually tell you what's in your soil. The recommendation for lawns is 1 inch per week. Again, sandy soil, clay soil. You got to kind of use your brain. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But the general calculation is here: 625 gallons per 100 or 1,000 square feet. You can read your water meter before, go down, take a picture of your water meter before, run your sprinkler, run your irrigation system, whatever it is, and then go down and take a picture afterwards and do the math. The other alternative to that is doing whatever watering and collecting. You're putting a number of these guys. We have these for free. The Water and Sewer Division, if anybody's interested in a rain gauge, it's generally one per household, but if you want to do this test, we'll give you some as long as you promise you bring them back, and we can give them out to the next person, or you can use the tuna cans. And the goal, as you can see up there, is to get nice, long, deep roots that can get farther down into the soil. How many doing on time, Angie?
You have 7 minutes.
7 minutes? Okay, perfect. So irrigation, this is what most people think of for irrigation, is those typical rotors that you see spraying. But there is also drip irrigation. This is something that a lot of people have tried to move towards. And if drip irrigation is installed properly, it's probably one of the most efficient methods of irrigation. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand what it is and install it wrong, and it can be even more wasteful than typical irrigation. This guy right here, a lot of people think of this as drip irrigation, but that's actually just your typical soaker hose that you could hook up to like a hose bib on the side of your house, turn it on, run it through your garden bed. So that's more of a manual type process. Some of the other things that I've actually seen some customers do and call us up, oh my God, I installed drip irrigation, it's supposed to be amazing, but my water bill is ridiculously high, is they get that black tube up there, but instead of having little holes that have pressure emitters that let out, one drip every 30 seconds or 15 seconds, or have, a rate per hour, it's just a slice in the side of the pipe. So certain areas that are very close to where the water comes out, water's just pouring out of it, and at the end, nothing's trickling out. So they're thinking that they're doing something really good, but in reality, they get a very shocking bill. This one up the, yes, 5 minutes? Thank you. You often see this black and this brown color here. And then there's also something for those who have, garden beds, is this newer type called micro drip, where the tubes are much, much smaller, and you simply cut the tube and put in different types of emitters that have all different rates, and you can direct it right to the roots of the plant or your vegetable garden. And it's kind of a set it and forget it. I kind of don't like this bottom picture here. Let's see if I can ignore this right here, because they are putting in some type of a fertilizer or chemical, but you get the theory. There's a little pump. You can put it in your different beds, and there's lots of different emitters going on there. What's scary about the addition of the chemical is it has to have the right type of back siphonage device on there, so that if there's a water main break or something happens, it doesn't end up back in your home plumbing. So not supporting the addition of fertilizer to any of these systems, but micro drip can be really, really handy. They even have rings that you can put right around the base of a bush or a plant. And designing for the future, as you're looking for things, we are going to have changing weather, like we all know, changing landscapes. The planting zones are going to shift. We're not, what are we, 5, 6 for the USDA zone? 6. Thank you. And so eventually that border is going to shift. So the hardiness zone is going to increase. Some plants that historically worked really well here are not going to work as well and overwinter as well. Also changing landscapes. Looking at your yard, if you have a tree, remember as you're planting there, look up. It's not going to look the same in 5 years. It's going to grow out more. As you'll see when you get to Betsy's property, trees also move on in their life. As You know, Betsy used to have a gorgeous, was it river birch in her front yard? And it was gorgeous, but it created a lot of shade, and it eventually came down. And now her front yard is a lot more sunny. So as you remove a tree, you have to realize that maybe next year you're gonna have to move plants around to the next locations. Increasing restrictions, you know, our permit is coming out. We're going to have to just implement more restrictions. So planning, you know, realizing that you're not just going to be able to water as much as you were. And, you know, this is a little funky right now, but this is just a map from NOAA that over the years the frequency of drought is going to be increasing. And 2030, that's 10 years away. The severity of the droughts that are going to be coming are going to be getting worse and worse, and realizing that those water-loving plants, unless you live right along those wetlands, aren't necessarily going to survive, and even those wetlands borders are going to change. And there's no water stretch code. I mean, like I said, we have the town bylaws. LEED is a great program because, you know, if you're building a new house and it's LEED certified, people are thinking energy. They're not necessarily thinking that water is going to be built into there. I was talking to someone the other day in their LEED certified home. They actually collect all their rainwater, put it into a cistern, and it leaches out into the leaching field. There's also water sense programs. But I'm getting this to answer 2 minutes? 1 minute, okay. So it's soil health, and one of the things that you really need to think about when you're working is, are you going to continually amend your soil? Are you going to change your soil health? Are you going to make it healthier, or are you going to plant for the existing conditions? What is your ultimate goal? Do you want to continually amend, or do you want to create that natural system that amends itself? Or are you going to plant for, you know, the red maple forest and not try to make it into a different environment? Wi-Fi irrigation controllers, these guys are the bee's knees. I am pretty sure that this is why our annual water demand has decreased. Is these have become more popular over the last like 4 or 5 years, and they actually adjust yours. You don't have to think about it. You set it. You do this thing that sets with the weather, and if it's going to rain the next day, the controller won't go off. If it's 60 degrees and kind of overcast, it will dial back the amount of time that your landscape is watered. If it's 90 degrees and windy, it'll operate at 100%. Don't be confused. There's a lot of little guys out there that are more tech companies that are trying to get into this land, but there's 2 main people, Rainbird and Concord, that are supported by irrigation professionals. These are 2 controllers that people will actually support, and will come out and be able to do the settings. Rainbird and Hunter, and all this stuff will also be online. But yes, you can greatly see that over the last few years, our average water demand has decreased. And rainwater capture, we're so used to rain barrels, and people always say, well, I have this rain barrel, but I can't do anything with the water. The one good thing about rain barrels is they slow the flow, but there's so many good opportunities. If you're doing new construction, this is the gray water thing that I was talking about. You can do an in-ground tank and pump it. You can have these pillows that can go underneath the porch, or you even have these fancy, they're called rainwater hogs, and they go between the rafters on your porch or wherever. You do need a pump. It is a little bit of that extra mechanical, but you really can use rainwater for a lot of your outdoor water needs.
We just attached the hose from the rain barrel at the bottom to one of our water-logging plants, and it would fill up, but afterwards it would drain out, so we keep the plants.
Yeah, that's great.
What did you call this, rainwater?
Rainwater hog, H-O-G. Yep. And they're actually kind of cool. They make a version for potable water storage for emergencies. And then everybody was asking about trees, and we are paying attention. We're collecting some nice information about why trees are so important in the environment. But thank you. I apologize for running through the second half of it. And I'll be around afterwards for more questions.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Delia Kay, Natural Resources Director, and wanted to talk with you a little bit about invasive plants in the landscape. think everybody probably is familiar with invasive plants to some degree or another. But I thought I would just take a minute and sort of talk about a little bit why they're so problematic. So invasive plants are non-native plants that outcompete our native plants. We have probably, in Massachusetts, about a third of the vascular plants are non-native, but only 7% of those are problematic. They are problematic because they outcompete our natives. And the main reason, or one of the reasons for that, is because they don't have any natural predators or parasites here. They've evolved, in Europe or Asia or wherever they have evolved. They have those natural checks and balances in that home community, but then they've come to our community, and they don't have anything that provides a check or a balance on their population. So they can really just overtake an entire ecosystem. You can end up with a monoculture of many of these plants. So big reduction in biodiversity. The National Wildlife Federation estimated that 42%, I think, of the threatened and endangered animals are at risk because of invasive plants. And so they do have a big effect on our ecosystems. And did I just get right to the beginning of this? I don't know how I did that. Sorry. Let's see. So this was a very, I'm learning a lot myself in this workshop, so this is great. So I just thought I would talk about, I'm part of a regional network that is looking at invasives throughout the Suasco watershed. And we have what we call SOUR 16 of our most common invasives. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I thought I would just touch on a couple of the really sort of common ones that we have here. And many of you will know bittersweet, which is the vine. It's a woody vine that you can see in the upper right photograph. If it's left unchecked, it will just strangle plants and pull down trees. I was just on a site yesterday where half a pine, I don't know whether it had come down on its own and then been covered with bittersweet, or if it had actually been pulled down by bittersweet. But in the middle photograph, you can see that this plant, it girdles trees, and it's quite problematic. It produces these little orange berries. People used to make wreaths out of them, and so we can see them around this time of year. All invasive plants that have been identified by the Massachusetts Invasive Plant Advisory Group, or MIPAG, are illegal to be sold. So you shouldn't be seeing these in nurseries anymore. I've seen bittersweet as recently as 5 years ago, so they still seem to be making their way in, but hopefully that's changing. Very distinctive roots on bittersweet. They're bright orange. Every single one of those fragments will sprout. So I'll get into removal in a little bit. It's just really important with a lot of the invasives that you have to get the entire root material out. And then also just if you are looking to remove invasives, it is an ongoing effort because you have a lot of seeds that are going to be in the seed bed. These seeds, a lot of the invasives, this is another problem with them, is that they are spread by birds, and so they're being distributed throughout the landscape. And the science is not, I think the jury is still out on this, but there is a school of thought that the fruits from invasives for our native songbirds, it's like junk food. So very little nutritive value, have a high sugar content, but it has an effect on their ability to make it to their migratory overwintering grounds. Glossy buckthorn is also very common in town. It has a very glossy leaf. What's distinct about this plant is on the stem, on that lower left, you can see it's a very dark stem with these white lenticels. If it has not been cut, it's actually easy to pull out. It's quite shallow rooted. The two right photographs are at Old Calf Pasture, where we have one of the largest regional populations of a rare violet, the Britain's violet, and it was being overrun by this glossy buckthorn. We only can mow that meadow once a year because it's so wet, and so what we did was we made our problem a lot worse. because by mowing invasives, unless you do it 8 or 10 times a year, you just really increase the strength, the root mass. And so we were not able to pull that out. So we did a targeted herbicide approach. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. But the top photograph is a forest of buckthorn, and the bottom is, a couple of years after, where it now has just native grasses that are growing in there.
Do you know how high does it grow, this thing?
Buckthorn can get to be 15,
Okay, I think
18
I
feet.
Okay.
A lot of times it's a
I
shrub.
recognize that trunk.
Say it again?
I recognize the trunk, so that's what I had.
Yeah.
I confused it with winterberry, actually, because it's growing near the winterberry. They look quite similar.
The winterberry bark is going to be a lot lighter,
Okay.
and the berry is going to be on the buckthorn. That they will turn almost black throughout as the season progresses.
Okay.
And
Where's
they've
the
dropped at this point. The fruit has dropped on buckthorn at this point.
That's right. Yeah, the fruit has dropped on
Whereas
buckthorn
winterberry
at
is
this
holding
point.
it right
That's good to know.
now. Yeah.
Did those baggies work over at,
They did not have great success at Gowing Swamp with those buckthorn baggies. It's hard because you have to get it around the entire root system. So on a large population, it can be challenging. Black swallowwort is another really noxious invasive. The reason I put this in is because it's a European milkweed, and it has come over here. It's got a very leathery leaf. It has these seed pods that you can see in the lower left corner, and then tiny little, not tiny, small purple flowers around the, you can see them in the top left photograph and in the middle one as well. So this plant is particularly obnoxious because our native monarchs primarily are on our native milkweed. So we have the Incarnata, tuberosa, and what's the other Asclepias? There are 3 that I can think of.
The common milkweed? The common milkweed?
Yeah.
Or the one we love, the street one?
So we have these 3 that are quite common, especially the common milkweed, and monarchs find milkweed through visual and chemical cues. They lay their eggs exclusively on milkweeds, and over hundreds of thousands of years, monarchs have evolved the ability to eat milkweed, which is toxic. It has a cardiac glycoside. They have evolved the ability to ingest it, which in turn makes them toxic to predators. So it's a great evolutionary strategy, but then in comes this European milkweed, and they don't have enough differentiation between those 2 milkweeds to realize it's not the native milkweed. However, the larvae that are laid on those eggs have 0 survivorship. So it's, particularly, it's one of my least favorites. So wherever you can plant native milkweeds, it's going to be a benefit for our monarchs and other pollinators. This is just a picture of the root of the swallowwort. It's very difficult to pull this out. I don't know if anybody's tried. It snaps at the base frequently, so you really have to dig it out to get that whole root crown. Garlic mustard, you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, just the complete profusion of garlic mustard that has just overtaken the entire herbaceous understory. It's a biennial. The first year leaf is a basal rosette. It's a rounder leaf than in the left-hand photographs. That's the second year plant, and it becomes more of a pointed leaf. It's very easy to pull out. It's quite satisfying to pull out with kids. And, we did last year do a town-wide garlic mustard pull from town lands, and we had great support from the community, so thank you. We had, I think, 130 bags of garlic mustard that were removed. Janet Rothrock, who I'm sure many of you know, she spearheaded it. I think she alone coordinated 40 bags out of the nurse snack hill, so we'll be doing that again next year. Invasive honeysuckles, this is another problem with the invasives, is that they form this impenetrable mass that, if you don't have trails through some of the conservation lands or areas, it is impossible to get through some of these, multiflora is another one. This is also very satisfying to pull out because it is very shallow rooted. It's got this very pale shredded bark stem, similar to blueberry, but actually a little bit lighter. It's an opposite leaf with these usually red, sometimes orange berries. And it's a very fragrant flower in the spring.
Are all honeysuckles invasive?
No, there's a native, it's a vine. So Sempervirens is the native, but there are three, Solenistra, Tatarica, Moro, and Japonica are the three most common. And they're shrub honeysuckles, whereas our native is more of a vine. So there's lots of ways you can go about removing invasives, and we've tried a lot of them. So the garlic mustard, as I said, the top right photograph is, they were fifth graders who worked at the town forest several years ago to pull out a bunch of garlic mustard. So there's the mechanical or manual methods, and that's obviously hand pulling. Also, the two lower left photographs, we have tools at the office that are called wheat wrenches, and I loan them out if anybody would like. We have 3 or 4, and they function by clamping on the base of the stem, and then you just lever it out. So on the left-hand side, that photograph is after it's being pulled out of the ground. So it's a very effective, and it saves your back from a lot of strain. It's quite satisfying. If you had a large, we actually don't do this photograph of, mechanized equipment, but there have been projects where people have done that, where they have just a very large-scale infestation of invasive removal. The key with that is if you ever do something like that, and you have all that exposed soil, you have to make sure it gets planted, so that otherwise you're just going to be, exploding in invasives the following year because of the seed bank. And as I said, you have to stay on it if you're going to do these invasives projects. It's something that you really need to commit to for a period of years. Goats, we've tried goats at Hayward Meadow to work on the invasives that are sort of at the fringe between the fields, the meadow, and the woodland. I did not have great experience with them. Goats are browsers. They should be eating woodies and not eating herbaceous plants, but they were eating the Joe Pyeweed and the goldenrods as much as they were eating the stuff that we had put them in for. So other people have had much better experience with them than I have, so that was just my particular experience. Another method of control is biological. So the top 2 photographs are purple loosestrife, which is still quite common, but I don't know if people have noticed how much it has decreased in the past 10 years. So the town, the land trust, Fish and Wildlife, maybe Sudbury Valley trustees, a number of us did these Galaricella beetle releases years ago, and they are a biological control that works on eating the milkweed. I've got milkweed on the drain. The loosestrife leaves, and so you can see that photograph. It's the and if you're out in the wetlands and you look and see loosestrife, if you see these leaves that are deeply holy, you can assume that there's some population of those Galaricella beetles that are still working on them. So that has been a very effective approach. It does not completely eradicate the population, which is fine, but it allows there to be a balance of other plants in that ecosystem. And in fact, it's better that it doesn't completely eradicate it because this allows the Galaricella beetle to overwinter and have a food source in ongoing years. Yes?
Do those beetles eat other things?
They don't. So they I forget who does the testing on these, but they test them for years before they are allowed to be released. There's a moth right now that Arnold Arboretum is doing a pilot testing with for swallowwort. So, it'll be years before that's actually let loose onto the, because we don't want to create the same problems that we're trying to eradicate. So, just quickly, driving around, everybody can see now this is the perfect time of year to see burning bush, which is brilliant. It's so, so pretty with that really, really deep red leaf. Rip it out. It's terrible. So this was a plant that was introduced as an ornamental, and it has escaped into the forest, and it is, you know, it doesn't provide any native benefits. You can plant in its place the native, we have the high-bush cranberry and a high-bush blueberry. They also are beautiful in this time of year with their leaf coloration, and you have edible berries. And then there's so many alternatives that you can plant if you take out the invasives. You can replace them with, Amelanchier is a beautiful spring blooming, very pretty form, small tree, chokeberry or bromia, the dogwoods, winterberry. Spicebush is one of my favorites. It's more of a woodland, and it is the host for the spicebush swallowtail. Bayberry is beautiful and fragrant. Sweet pepper bush and New Jersey tea. These are all natives. They're very high value pollinator plants. And I brought in this pollinator friendly plants for the Northeast United States. You're welcome to flip through this. It was, I believe, an NRCS publication. And we also have a little brochure that some of you may have seen on native plants for sustainable landscaping. And then the other source that I look at is Native Plant Trust, which used to be New England Wildflower Society. They have a list of plants that they grow, and it's extensive. And anything on that list, we would consider native. And all of the natives are going to be much better pieces in the ecosystem.
We need to hold questions, sorry. We'll have you ask questions on the way over there. I apologize, we're running really late, so I want to make sure we get you to.
Okay, I'm almost done. These are just some of the native alternatives of herbaceous plantings. If you were looking to take out some lawn, these are some possibilities that you could put in as well. And all of these, are very, very prolific for pollinators. We actually put in a small demonstration pollinator garden at Haywood Meadow this fall with some of these plantings. We put in New England aster, hyssop, clustered mountain mint, actually a lot of these foxglove, time and bergamot, and some of the old weeds. So some, I think as Miles was saying, next year we'll just keep that cut to a height of 6 to 8 inches over the season. And then the following year, we're hoping for a very robust profusion of pollinator plantings. And this is just a list of some resources. That last one, NRCS, is the one that is that publication on pollinator plantings. So thank you very much.
And all of these will be made available through the presentation. So I saw some of you taking photos, and I know that's probably in an effort to want to go and do it right now, I'm sure. So we're going to hold questions just in an effort to get to Betsy's house, because we really want to see this in action, a lot of this maintenance and a lot of the tips and advice that was given today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to